personally am delighted that you are here. It is always an interesting labor for me to put this together. Nothing comes about by itself, so I am grateful for all the people who help. You'll hear about them in just a little bit. So we're about to get started on what promises to be a day-long event talking about the ethics of covering trauma and lots of different ways we look at trauma. But before we begin, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dean Amy Reynolds. Dean Reynolds is the new Dean of the College of Communication and Information. So please welcome Amy.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for being here, for joining us, and for those of you, you know that we're live streaming this, so we appreciate those of you who are joining us online and participating via social media today. On behalf of Kent State University and the College of Communication and Information, we are just delighted to have the 11th annual Poynter KSU Media Ethics Workshop here today. As Dean of the College, I get to work with a lot of different faculty and a lot of different activities, and I will tell you that I am extremely proud of the work that our School of Journalism and Mass Communication does in the realm of ethics and media ethics. This is such an important area. It's central to what we do, what we believe, and so for our school and for Professor Leach to be such a leader nationally in this is something I take great pride in and the college takes great pride in. You know, one of the things that has been striking to me as I've talked with journalists across the country about the digital transformation of news is how important ethics is to our thinking about how our field is changing. And I've had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing David Carr, who's the New York Times media columnist who passed away recently. And I interviewed him for a book I was working on about the digital transformation, particularly in the city of New Orleans. And if any of you have read David's work, you know that he was very much a champion of digital innovation, and he liked some of the new ways that we could be empowered to tell stories. But at the core of all of his writing was still an understanding and a concern about ethical principles and ethical ideas. And one of the things he told me about New Orleans when the newspaper decided to reduce its print publication, I'll just give you a very, very quick quote. He said, "It was one of the few American cities where you could go and see people engaged in the act of steadily reading a newspaper." And to David, it wasn't about the physical newspaper. It was the fact that journalism was so central to that community, whether it was post-Hurricane Katrina or whether it was in exposing governmental corruption. New Orleans is not, it wouldn't like to say that it's famous for corruption, political corruption, but I think that's probably fairly accurate to say. And so thinking about these ethical underpinnings to all the things that we do across all of our media professions is what this workshop is really about. And so if you think about it, for more than a decade, the Poynter KSU Media Ethics Workshop has really tried to take a look at ethical issues from a critical perspective and take on timely topics. And so that's what we're doing here today. As you know, this year's workshop is focusing on enduring trauma, covering trauma, and we have a tremendously talented and smart, engaged group here to present. So I wanted to thank them for taking the time and participating today. We are really fortunate to have all these folks here willing to share their knowledge and experiences with us. And I'd also like just to take a second and thank our sponsors of this event, the Knight Foundation, Poynter, the Akron Beacon Journal, the Public Relations Society of America, Hennis Communications, the Dart Center for Journalism Trauma, our programs within the College of Communication and Information, the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, even our local Tree City Coffee, which has been supportive of our efforts as well. So thank you to them for their support. Thank you all for being here. And now I'd like to introduce the director of our School of Journalism and Mass Communication, Thor Wasbatten.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see all of you here, and as Amy mentioned, all of those who are watching online. This is a tremendous event and a tremendous day for all of us to be here discussing enduring trauma. I do want to thank Dean Amy Reynolds for her support for this workshop. As we know, it's her first year here, And she has already shown her dedication and determination to make our school and our college stronger. And through these conversations, like the Media Ethics Workshop, we're able to realize that. So thank you, Amy. I also want to thank Poynter, specifically Butch Ward, who is here today and standing to my left, and Kelly McBride, who's not here but typically is. In a few moments, she'll be speaking somewhere over my head, somewhere on one of these screens, and welcoming all of you as well. But your dedication, your commitment to media ethics and other ways to train journalists and help our communities throughout this country, valued and respected. So thank you. We appreciate that. I do want to thank our school and our college's staff and faculty who have worked so hard to put this event together. If you're in here and you work for JMC and are part of this workshop or CCI, please raise your hand so we can acknowledge you as well. Here we go. Good. And then, of course, I cannot finish without thanking Jan Leach. Professor Leach is one of the country's foremost experts in media ethics. She's an ethics fellow at Poynter, and I know she doesn't like making this about her, but we wouldn't have this workshop without you, Jan, so thank you very much. I do want to mention why I think personally this is so important for our conversation today. On September 11th, 2001, I was news director at KGUN-TV in Tucson, Arizona. And at about 6 o'clock in the morning, my pager went off, my cell phone went off, my home phone went off. And of course, on my pager, we had pagers back then, and my cell phone, it was my newsroom, telling me what was going on, please come in. On my home phone was my mother, who I grew up in New York City, and she was sitting on her balcony, which had a direct line of sight of the Twin Towers. And so she was telling me in her hysterical tone, she didn't know what was going on, and we didn't know whether my uncle was working in Tower 2 that day, which is where he worked every day for over a decade. Little did we know I had this conflict of what to do at that moment. Do I go to work and fulfill my professional responsibility to help direct coverage and inform my community? Do I stay home and fulfill that responsibility to help my family? Or do I try to get to New York and figure out what was going on with my mother and my uncle? That was a traumatic experience. Fortunately or unfortunately, I chose to go to work. And so for the next 15 days, I was at work, like many of us in this room here today. Found out at about 11 o'clock in the morning when I received a phone call from my uncle that he had missed his train and was watching everything unfold in Hoboken. Trauma is real. And on that day, things changed for all of us. Now, we're in a watershed moment in this university and all universities because our freshmen, think about this, our freshmen were 4 and 5 years old at the time of September 11th. This is the first cohort where most of them don't remember that day. They do not remember that day. But they understand how traumatic it has still been for them as they relive it or live it every year. So as we think about this, this is a group of students that have come into college who have lived with September 11th, although they weren't a part of September 11th, is what they remember. They've been a part of school shootings, workplace shootings, and now, with what happened in Roanoke, Virginia, they've been a part of the confluence and convergence of social media and violence in the very worst way. It is our responsibility to understand this. It's our responsibility today to discuss this. And it's our responsibility, I would argue, that it becomes even more important tomorrow and the next day when we talk about it again and again. Because we must learn how to cope, we must learn how to hope, and we must learn how to heal. That's what today is about. And I hope tomorrow is what it's about as well. Enjoy today. Jan.
Thank you, Thor. Thank you, Amy. Am I like the luckiest person I get to work with these people? I'm so very grateful. I also wanted to mention, this was mentioned very briefly, but there's a very important core group of people who help me put this together every year. I start working on it tomorrow, and they start working on it in May, and they come in even during the summer for basically nothing but donuts. So I do want to say for all of you who are here in the room, who are downstairs in the studio, who are upstairs in the booth, working on the live feed, taking pictures, I am personally so very grateful that this came together. If you would please acknowledge them, I would be very grateful. And enough of that. So here's the really important stuff that you want to know. Restrooms. The restrooms, if you leave this room, you would go down the straight hallway. About a third of the way down the hallway is the men's restroom on the right, and then another third of the way down the hallway past the elevator is the women's restroom. You can find them. There are restrooms on every floor. They're all in the same place, and just so you know, there is a floor plan in your binder so you can find the rest. I know this after 11 years. This is the most important thing. Secondly, Wi-Fi. So this whole building, and in fact the whole campus, is wired. You should be able to connect to the Wi-Fi easily. We encourage you to do that so that you can follow on Twitter, participate as often as you would like. So we will have the Twitter feed running all the way through. I did want to mention that in the past 4 years, we trend. So a lot of people are twittering, and then we twend. Not enough Diet Coke. We trend, and when we trend, we have gotten hacked. So don't be surprised if weird stuff shows up. Last year, it was ISIS. Don't worry about that. So we're going to trend. It's going to happen. We're aware of it. It's just not a big deal to us. So FYI on that. Next most important thing, lunch, right? So there's food. If you are registered for the day, you should have a name tag that looks like this, okay? The name tag is your lunch tag. So when you come back from the breakout sessions at noon before Dr. Ochberg starts speaking, you pick up a lunch there, you come into the room, he has agreed to speak while we chew, and that is your lunch ticket. So you need to have a name tag. If you're not going to be here for the whole day, you don't have a name tag, then run down to Starbucks or whatever. But this is your ticket for lunch, so make sure you have your ticket for lunch, okay? And then lastly, well, not lastly, but it's really important to me that people fill out the evaluations that are in your binders and in your packets. They're blue, and they're in the first little pocket of your binder. It would be really helpful if you just fill them out after each session so you remember what happened and how you felt about that. And then you could just turn them in at the registration table, or you can give them to me afterwards or whatever. But we really do look at them. We have a whole data set about them. I report them to Poynter and the Knight Foundation, what people said, but I get ideas for the next year. Speakers you might want to hear from, pacing of the program, all kinds of, we even changed the food because of the evaluations, so please fill out the evaluations. With that, I am delighted to tell you about our participation with Poynter. So the Poynter Institute for Media Studies in St. Petersburg, Florida is probably the nation's leading think tank on journalism. I've been a participant at Poynter, a teacher at Poynter in the Poynter College program, and an ethics fellow for too many years. Yeah, really. And they really are the leading experts in this. And they have been the partner for this program for the whole 11 years. In the past, Kelly McBride has always been here. And she, up until about 3 weeks ago, was planning to be here. But she was called away because she's now the vice president of programming at Poynter. And she couldn't be here with us today. But she sent a recorded message. We're going to hear from Kelly, and then I'll introduce Butch.
Current importance. I genuinely regret that I can't join you today. When Jan invited me to become part of the Kent State Media Ethics Workshop, I was a junior faculty member, and she was beginning her pathway toward tenure as a professor at Kent. Now Jan is tenured and totally killing it, and I'm in a leadership position at Poynter, and my duties require that I stay here in St. Petersburg this morning. But I want you to know that you are about to become part of a rigorous conversation about the changing nature of journalism in a democracy. And this topic of trauma could not come at a better time. Jan's ability to see into the future and pick these topics borders on clairvoyant. Now that there are no official gatekeepers, now that all of our citizens are journalists, and the nature of our ability to gather and disseminate news is ubiquitous, now that we can stream events from our phones, and consumers can find those streams with a very easy click, we are all going to be exposed to experiences of trauma in a more intimate and immediate way. This is neither good nor bad, it just is. And my colleague, Butch Ward, is about to give you an overview of where we stand in journalism, so I'll leave that to him. I want to encourage you as you go through the day to stay open and curious to the democratic implications of what you are learning. Think about how our perception of trauma changes our perception of the world around us. Because even being exposed to trauma in a mediated environment changes you and how you see that environment. For those of you who have toddlers, or maybe you have nieces and nephews, or you babysit somebody who's a toddler, think about how you responded to that child in the moments after you saw the lifeless body of Ian Curdy on a beach in Turkey. You probably hugged that kid a little tighter. And that's a good response, a healthy response. But repeated exposure to trauma can make us colder and harder. And that's bad for democracy. Because when we create policies or contribute to communities in ways that lack compassion, we minimize our ability to make the world a better place. Journalism, at its best, inspires everyone to connect with the outside world with the purpose of understanding and improving that world. So as you go through today, think specifically about how journalism can have a positive effect. If we can do that, then we can ensure that today's conversation has a lasting impact. Have a great day.
So I